Hey, today we're going to be talking about using active recall, a way to get higher grades with less work. Hey, I'm Ashley, the MBA Coach. We make videos on this channel to help you get more out of the time and the money that you're spending on your MBA. I'm talking about things like higher grades, I'm talking about productivity skills, I'm talking about improving your job search process, public speaking, and so much more. Today we're talking about active recall. So it turns out that most students actually study wrong. They use techniques that don't effectively help them form memories of the information that they're trying to learn. So what ends up happening is they read the material or they highlight it or summarize it and think they've got it down pat. Maybe they read it sort of for a second or third time and recognized it. But it turns out, of course, like recognizing something is not the same as being able to reproduce it from scratch, especially when you have an exam question that's maybe trying to trick you or adding some complexity to it. So what happens is you get to the exam and you don't perform as well as you hoped you would. So active recall is an evidence-based technique. And what I mean by that is there is tons of evidence from scientific research that shows active recall or active retrieval is a more effective way of learning. The way we form memories is much more firm or robust or solid when we actually try and retrieve the information from our brains and our memories instead of just passively consuming it. Using active recall or doing active recall is pretty simple, really. What you're doing is, as you're going through your text or your notes or whatever, you create questions out of the material, which you then later use to test yourself. And that process of testing yourself on the material, as I said, is so much more effective in forming memories than simply rereading the textbook. This is actually a little bit easier to understand with an example. So we're gonna go through Notion. As you know, I'm a big fan of Notion. I think it's a very, very useful and effective app for a whole range of different purposes. Before I jump into the demo, I just wanted to remind you about a weekly email I send out. It's a short read, it's less than 10 minutes. And what it does is it takes one actionable idea and explains and describes it to you, and you can implement it basically right away. The link's in the description below, so make sure to sign up for that. Without delaying any further, let's jump into the demo.
Now I'm going to show you how to do and create an active recall system for your textbook and for your notes questions here in Notion. It's really straightforward, but instead of making you watch me type all this stuff in, I'm going to recreate a couple of pieces of it, and then we'll go jump right into that part of it, and I'll show you how to use it. So a couple of shortcuts here in Notion. The / bar opens up this little tab box, a whole bunch of different options. We're going to start out by putting in a table of contents. As I said, we're recreating what we have above. We'll put a little divider in there, so /div. And we're off to the races. So to start with, let's put a header in. To do that, you can either do / and then go down the down arrows to header 1. Or what you can do is use $spacebar, and that puts a heading level 1. 2 number signs followed by spacebar is heading level 2, and 3 is heading level 3. So let's put the first one in here, okay? Those headers correspond to what we see over here. So this chapter is entitled Financial Instruments, Markets, and Intermediaries. The first section is for the financial system, and that's the one we're going to be starting with, as you see up here. And oops, I forgot to put the send the code for the header in, so we'll do that now. You can actually, as you can see, we're going to do that after we've typed in some text. So 2 number signs followed by spacebar automatically makes it a heading level 2. Notice too that our heading level 1 and our heading level 2 here were automatically inserted into the table of contents. Now we're going to create that first question, so we'll introduce the toggle. So the toggle is basically a greater than sign followed by the spacebar. You can see it creates the toggle there. We got that question by reading this line here. The way I'd recommend doing this is have a read through the section. As you're finding things that you think could be turned into questions, turn them into questions. So a country's financial system consists of entities that help us facilitate the flow of funds, blah, blah, blah. So there's a question from that would be, what does a country's financial system consist of? So we go here and then we hit enter, which gets us into the toggle part of the toggle. And we type in the answer, which is, if this were the only part of this question or section, then that would be it. We just hit enter and move on. But if you look further here, it actually gives you an example. You use the example of purchasing a home and asking, well, would you want to round up enough people to give you the money for the mortgage, or would you just go to a bank and borrow money that way? And of course, that would make a lot more sense than it is to go to a bank. But here we could put a toggle for what is an example. So you see here, I've got a toggle that's nested within another toggle. There can be multiple instances where you have subsections within your first toggle. As this chapter progresses, you would probably see this. You'd probably see up to 3 or 4 subsections. If it's getting to be too much more than that, you may want to pull it out and move it down. As you do this more, you'll get more of a feel for it. You'll get more comfortable with saying, I think this is the best way to go in this case. So let's finish this one off. Okay, so that's the example there. I'm not going to go too much more into it because I think you can see I'm replicating this thing above. So for now, let's leave it at that. If there are clarifications that are required, ask me in the comments, connect with me on Twitter, something like that. So now let's move on to how do we actually use this? Let's say we're done through to this part. How do we make use of it? Well, the way you do it is you would probably do this part on one day. You would put your questions in on day one. And then you would leave it. You're done. You've done your work on that chapter or that set of notes from class or whatever it is, and you leave it aside. We're going to take advantage of spaced repetition. If you give a gap between when you work on something for the first time and the second time and so forth, what you're doing is you're enhancing your ability to remember it. This is the work that Ebbinghaus did on the forgetting curve and spaced repetition, that kind of thing. So we're going to take advantage of that. So we're going to leave this for now, and then either late in the day or the next day, we're going to go through this and ask ourselves these questions. So first, before we leave on day one, we want to close these tabs here. So we don't want to give any answers away. Obviously, when we look at it, we usually look at it. Let's say we're going through it on day two, and we ask ourselves, what does the country's financial system consist of? And you don't remember the answer. So what you do is you hit Windows key period, which pulls up your emojis, and you go X, got that one wrong. Okay, so maybe you would say, I don't even remember what it is. Then you check out the answer, and you're like, oh, okay, it's the entities that help with the flow of funds, blah, blah, blah. And you ask yourself, what's an example of this? And you're like, okay, flow of funds. Yeah, I think that's the mortgage example where, do I go try and find a bunch of people who are going to lend me the money, or do I just go to a bank? Oh, good, I got that one. Look at that, I got that one right. Okay, so then you go Windows period, and you put a check mark there. Great job. Continue on doing it this way, and I'm just going to speed through here and make some assumptions on what we got right and wrong. Okay, so let's assume that's how it all worked out. So we now have some right answers, some wrong answers, and we've completed day two. Our first review of this, that's done. We now go away, do something else. The next day, 2 days later, we come back to it. But here's the key. We only come back to the questions that we got wrong the first time. So let's assume that we got that one wrong. Ask yourself, what does a country's financial system consist of? You may remember it's entities that facilitate the flow of funds from those who have the funds to invest to those who need the funds to invest. And you check it out, and you're like, great, I got it right. And so now you put a check mark there. So here's some people will do a little differently. So one approach is to say, well, maybe I got lucky on my first time through and I got it right once, but I actually don't really remember it. Using that sort of philosophy, a really good way I think to do it is to try and get something right 2 times in a row. Because if you get it right 2 times in a row, it's a good chance you're getting the hang of that one. So you might ask yourself this question again, even though you have 1 check mark, and you ask yourself an example, and you're like, yeah, financing a mortgage, you're not going to go get a bunch of people to individually get together and give you a mortgage. You're going to go to a bank. So that obviously makes a lot more sense. So let's do that. Let's go there. We got that one right. And then, information asymmetry. Yeah, we've got that one pretty much down cold. Now for this one here, in addition to lenders and borrowers, what are the components of a financial system? What do they do? And maybe you remember in this case where it's financial markets, regulators of financial activities. You can't remember the middle one. You can't remember the second one, financial intermediaries. So check it out and you're like, financial intermediaries. That's the one I got wrong. Okay, so we put an X there for the second time. Remember, we're on day 3 now. We prepared the questions. We reviewed them once. That's the first set of check marks or X's. And now we're on day 3 of the system, or our second review. Let's say we got financial markets right again. I'm going to zip through this. So we've now completed day 3, or our second review of the system, and we leave it alone. And then we come back to it. Day later, 2 days later, 3 days later, something like that. Once again, we go through the ones that we only have 1 check mark beside. So here we only have 1 check mark, but now we've got our hands around that one pretty well. So you put the 3rd check mark, or your 2nd check mark rather. These 2 already have 2 check marks, so we don't need to do anything there. Here we ask ourselves, what are the, in addition to lenders and borrowers, you ask yourself that question. Hooray, we got it right finally. So that was correct there. We got this one right twice. Only got this one right once, so we got to ask that question again. What do financial intermediaries do? Well, they facilitate the transactions. All right, great news. Got it right for the 2nd time in a row, so we're done with that one now. And then we already got that one for 2 times in a row. Finally, we're going to go to day 5. So we had 1 day of preparation, or where we created the questions, and then so far we have 3 days of asking ourselves the questions and reviewing it. So this would be day 5 now. So we have only 1 left to do, because we got 2 check marks there, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, and 2 there. So we go and say, in addition to borrowers and lenders, what are the other components of the financial system? What do they do? And we remember the answer again this time, so we actually have our hands around it. So there we go.
Okay, so hopefully that demo cleared things up. I want to mention a couple of other quick things before we wrap here. So first off, One of the things you want to do is make sure that your questions are single ideas. If you combine like multiple things into your answers, it's going to get confusing and it'll be hard to be able to dissect what you need to figure out if you're having trouble remembering them. So number 2 is learn the material, then try to remember the material. So as you're going through the text and making the questions, make sure you're thinking about the material itself. That'll help the initial memory formation and the learning process. Instead of just sort of mindlessly, because you can actually kind of get into this routine or flow of mindlessly putting in questions, but then you're gonna have to learn the material and try to remember it at the same time, which is a less effective approach. And then finally, and this is actually the biggest value of active recall and this approach using questions, is use this as a diagnostic. This is one of the most important things, is to use this to identify what it is that you don't know and need to review more. So make sure to sign up for my weekly emails, like I mentioned, it's in the description below. If you like this video, I think you're really gonna like this one over here. Make sure to check it out. Otherwise, it was great to see you. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon.